What if the moment the multiverse cracked open, it wasn't a superhero who fell through, but a sorcerer who believed he understood reality itself? What if Dr. Stephen Strange, master of the mystic arts, opened a portal expecting to confront a demonic incursion, and instead found himself staring into the cold, endless stars of a universe governed not by magic, but by science? And what if, in that universe, a starship called the Enterprise detected an anomaly so impossible that it threatened to unravel everything Starfleet believed about physics, logic, and the nature of existence? Because when magic collides with a galaxy built on reason, something has to break. The question is, will it be the sorcerer or the stars? What if Dr. Strange's greatest spell led him into a universe that doesn't believe in magic? The Sanctum Sanctorum trembled as arcane sigils burned in the air like dying suns. Strange hovered above the floor, cloak of levitation snapping behind him as if caught in a storm no one else could feel. The eye of Agamotto pulsed against his chest, flickering with unstable green light. This shouldn't be happening, he muttered, hands weaving through impossibly complex patterns. The multiverse stabilized after the last incursion. I sealed the fractures. I saw them close, but the rift before him widened anyway. It wasn't the familiar shimmer of a portal. It was jagged, violent, like reality had been cut open with a blade too dull to be clean. Through it, he saw stars, not a city, not another Earth, not a dark dimension ruled by some eldritch tyrant. Stars, endless, silent. And then something massive drifted across his vision, sleek, metallic, bearing the unmistakable shape of a vessel built not by mystics, but by engineers. Impossible, Strange whispered. The cloak tugged at him, warning him. The eye pulsed faster, and then the rift exploded on the bridge of the USS Enterprise. Red alert sirens blared. Captain, I'm detecting a spatial rupture. Off the port bow, Lieutenant Ura reported, fingers flying across her console. It's not warp-based, not subspace. It's something else. Spock's dark eyes narrowed as he analyzed the readings. The energy signature does not correspond to any known phenomenon catalogued by Starfleet. Captain James T. Kirk stood slowly from his chair, gaze fixed on the main view screen. A tear in space itself twisted before them, glowing with amber, symbols that made no mathematical sense. Are we looking at a weapon? Kirk asked. Unlikely, Spock replied. It appears unstable. And then a figure shot out of the rupture. The rift snapped closed behind him like a wound sealing. Shut. The figure tumbled through vacuum robes, billowing, hands glowing faintly. Life signs detected. McCoy's voice crackled over Kumscumen. Somehow, in open space, Kirk barked, transport him aboard. Now, the transporter beam caught Strange just as his protective spell faltered. He materialized on the Enterprise transporter pad, collapsing to one knee, gasping. The cloak wrapped around him defensively. Security officers raised phasers. Strange looked up and froze. The room was sterile, metallic, clinical. No mystical residue, no ambient magic in the air, just technology. He staggered to his feet. Where am I? You're aboard the USS Enterprise, Kirk said cautiously, stepping forward. And unless you can explain how you survived in the vacuum of space, we're going to have a very interesting conversation. Strange scanned their minds instinctively only to recoil. Their thoughts were structured, disciplined, logical, especially the one standing beside Kirk. Spock. You're not from my universe, Strange realized aloud. Spock tilted his head slightly, an intriguing assumption. On what basis do you make this claim? Strange held up his hand and conjured a small, glowing sigil. The security officers flinched. Spock did not. A sigil flickered, then sputtered, then died. Strange's eyes widened. He tried again. A basic shielding charm. Nothing. The eye of Agamotto dimmed to a lifeless green stone. No, he whispered. McCoy stepped forward cautiously. Jim, I don't know what kind of circus act this is, but that man's physiology is fluctuating. It's like he's adjusting to a different set of universal constants. Spock's fingers danced across a handheld scanner. Fascinating. The molecular cohesion of his body suggests it was not originally calibrated to this space-time continuum. Strange stared at his trembling hands. My magic, he breathed. It's gone. Or was it? Far beyond the Enterprise, in the dark, between stars. Something ancient stirred. A ripple passed through subspace, a presence that did not belong, and it felt the arrival of something unnatural. On the bridge, alarms suddenly erupted. "Captain," Ura shouted. "Multiple system failures across decks 3 through 7. Warp core efficiency dropping." Spock's brow furrowed. "The anomaly that brought our guest here has not dissipated. It appears to have integrated itself into our subspace field." Strange looked up sharply. "That's not an anomaly," he said quietly. Kirk turned to him. "Then what is it?" Strange's expression darkened as he felt it, faint, distant, but unmistakable. "A tear," he said, "and something came through with me." The view screen flickered. For a split second, the stars outside twisted into a spiral of burning symbols only Strange could recognize. A language older than Earth, older than this galaxy. Spock saw only distortion. What Strange saw a message. "You do not belong here, sorcerer." The temperature on the bridge dropped. Kirk gripped the arm of his chair. "Report." Strange stepped forward slowly, fear creeping into his voice for the first time in years. "If I'm right," he said, staring at the warped stars, "this universe just became aware of magic, and somewhere in the void, something answered. What if the universe itself rejected magic, and now something within it was hunting the one man who brought it here?" The stars on the view screen twisted again just for a heartbeat. To the crew, it was interference, a minor distortion in subspace. To Spock, it was an anomaly demanding explanation. But to Stephen Strange, it was a warning. He felt it pressing against his mind like cold fingers against glass. Not a demon, not a god, something older, something that did not wear a face. He said something came through with you, Kirk said sharply, stepping closer. To find something. Strange's jaw tightened. "In my universe, reality isn't just particles and equations. It's layers, dimensions stacked over each other like pages in a book. When I opened that rift, I didn't just cross space, I crossed rules." Spock's gaze sharpened. "You are implying that your arrival altered our universal constants." "I'm saying your universe doesn't have defenses against what followed me." Almost on cue, the lights flickered. A tremor rippled through the deck. Warp core fluctuations. "Increasing." Scotty's voice burst over Comes. "Captain, I can't explain it. It's like the core's responding to an external field, but there's nothing there." Spock checked his scanner again. His expression, usually carved from stone, shifted slightly. "There is now." On the view screen, space bent inward. Not exploded, not imploded. Bent, as if an invisible mass was pressing against reality itself. Cook squared his shoulders. "Red alert. Shields up." The familiar hum of defensive systems filled the bridge. Strange stepped closer to the screen, eyes narrowing. He felt the eye of Agamotto grow warmer against his chest. "That's not a ship," he whispered. "What is it?" McCoy demanded. Strange hesitated. "Picard, how did you explain magic to a civilization that mapped the stars with logic?" "It's a correction," he said finally. "Your universe operates on consistency. Cause and effect. Predictable laws. Magic doesn't belong here. It's a contradiction." Spock folded his hands behind his back. "And contradictions, in a stable system, must be resolved." "Yes," Strange said quietly. "By removing the variable." A pulse slammed into the Enterprise. Not a beam, not a torpedo. A wave. The shields flared violently, the deck tilting as consoles sparked. "Shields holding at 70%. Ura called out. But Strange felt something else. The cloak of levitation jerked as if struck by invisible lightning. Strange staggered, clutching his head. Inside his mind, images flashed, fractals collapsing, dimensions sealing shut, arcane symbols burning away. The presence was targeting him. "You are incompatible." A voice echoed not in the air, but in his thoughts it was not male, not female, not even sentient in the way he understood it was. Systemic. "You are in error." Strange gritted his teeth. "I've been called worse." He raised his hands instinctively, trying to summon a defensive sigil. Nothing happened. The eye flickered weakly. "No," he breathed. "Come on." Another pulse struck. The ship groaned. Structural integrity dropping. Scotty shouted. Spock analyzed the readings with razor focus. "Captain, the phenomenon is not attacking the vessel directly. It is targeting quantum irregularities centered on our guest. Kirk's eyes snapped to Strange. "You're the bullseye, I noticed." Strange muttered. The presence pressed harder. And then something changed. Instead of forcing its way through shields, it phased through them. The temperature plummeted. Frost crept across the bridge. Consuls. Crew members gasped as a distortion formed in the center of the room. Not a creature, not a body, a tear in perception itself. Strange felt it fully now. Not a demon from the dark dimension. Not Dormammu. This was something purer, a cosmic immune system. Spock stepped forward, eyes locked on the anomaly. Fascinating. It appears to be a self-regulating universal response mechanism. McCoy shot him a look. Spock, now's not the time for admiration. Strange forced himself upright. It's trying to erase me. Kirk didn't hesitate. Can you stop it? Strange laughed, once short and bitter. Not without magic. The distortion surged toward him. The cloak flared outward defensively. But this wasn't a physical attack. It passed through fabric, through flesh. Strim screamed as his astral form was yanked halfway from his body. The crew froze in shock as a translucent version of Strange flickered into visibility, half detached. Eyes widened just slightly. Remarkable. Kirk grabbed Strange's shoulder. "Hold on, I can't anchor." Strange gasped. "This universe, there's no mystical lattice to bind to." The presence tightened its grip. "You are foreign matter." The eye of Agam suddenly blazed with green light. Not from Strange. From itself. The time stone responded not with magic as Strange knew it, but with raw temporal energy. Spock's scanner spiked violently. "Captain, the artifact around his neck is emitting chronometric radiation beyond measurable parameters." The distortion hesitated. For the first time, Strange felt it. Confusion, because time manipulation was not magic. It was physics. Advanced, dangerous, but physics. The eye rotated slowly, projecting a thin beam of green light that intersected the anomaly. The bridge filled with overlapping images, past, present, and potential futures flickering at once. In one, the Enterprise exploded. In another, Strange disintegrated. In another, the anomaly spread across the galaxy, unraveling warp travel itself. Kirk stared at the cascading possibilities. "What are we looking at?" Strange's voice echoed from both his physical and astral forms. "Consequences." The anomaly recoiled slightly, destabilized by the temporal interference. Spock analyzed rapidly. "It appears the entity often unable to reconcile nonlinear time manipulation within its correction protocols." McCoy blinked. "In English, he doesn't know how to delete him if he exists in multiple timelines simultaneously." Strange forced a grim smile. "Finally, a rule I can use." He focused every ounce of will into the eye. Time fractured around him. Dozens of strangers appeared across the bridge, each existing half a second out of phase. The anomaly flickered violently. "You destabilize continuity." "Good," Strange growled. "That's the point." With a final surge, the eye emitted a blinding pulse. The distortion imploded inward, collapsing like a star. Into nothingness. Silence fell over the bridge. The frost evaporated. Systems stabilized. Spock lowered his scanner slowly. The phenomenon has retreated beyond sensor range. Strange collapsed fully back into his body, panting. The eye dimmed once, more but not completely. Kirk approached him carefully. "Is it gone?" Strange looked toward the stars. "No," he said softly. "It learned." Spock stepped beside him. "Clarify." Strange swallowed. "It knows time exists here. It knows I can manipulate it. And now," he met Spock's eyes, "it's going to adapt." Far beyond the Enterprise, deep in subspace, the cosmic immune response recalibrated. New equations formed, new countermeasures. And this time, it would not hesitate. On the bridge, the viewscreen flickered one last time, and for a fraction of a second, if Sack off aside symbols. What if the very foundations of Starfleet science began to crack? Not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. The symbols lingered on the viewscreen for less than a second, angular burning, impossible. Then they were gone, but Spock had seen them, and that changed everything. "Captain," Spock said quietly, eyes fixed forward. The distortion was not random interference. It contained structured geometry, repeating patterns, intent. Kirk turned slowly. "You're saying it was communicating?" "I am saying," Spock replied, that we may have encountered a phenomenon capable of encoding information beyond our current understanding of physics. Strange, still kneeling, let out a strained breath. Welcome to my Tuesday. McCoy helped him to his feet. Easy, Houdini. You just split yourself into a dozen ghost copies. Care to explain how that doesn't violate every law of, well, everything? It does, Strange said. That's why it worked. The bridge crew exchanged glances. Spock stepped closer, studying the eye of Agamotto with open curiosity. Your artifact harnesses temporal mechanics without technological mediation. It appears to be both power source and control interface. It's called the Time Stone, Strange replied. And where I'm from, it's one of 6 fundamental aspects of reality. Spock's brow lifted slightly. 6. Space, time, reality, power, mind, soul. McCoy crossed his arms. And let me guess, you've got them all in your back pocket. Strange's expression darkened. Not anymore. A heavy silence followed. Kirk folded his hands behind his back. Mr. Spock, can we trace that correction mechanism? Spock returned to his station. Long-range sensors are detecting fluctuations in subspace harmonics. The anomaly is not retreating randomly. It is repositioning. Repositioning for what? Ura asked quietly. Strange answered before Spock could. For containment. The word hung in the air. Spock's fingers moved swiftly across the console. Captain, I am detecting a rapidly forming gravimetric lattice, approximately 200,000 kilometers off our starboard bow. The view screen shifted. Space shimmered, and then lines of light began to connect across the void dot at first glance. It looked like a constellation forming in real time, but the lines were too precise, too deliberate. They're building something, Kirk murmured. Strange stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Not building, calculating. Clefs expanded, forming a vast spherical grid. Spock's voice remained calm, but there was tension beneath it. The structure appears to be a containment matrix, operating on quantum entanglement principles. McCoy blinked. You mean a cage? Yes, Dr. Spock replied evenly. A cage. Strange felt the eye pulse again warmer now, reactive. It's not trying to erase me anymore, he realized. Then what? Kirk demanded. It's isolating the variable. The sphere expanded rapidly. Too rapidly, Captain Ura called out. The lattice is locking onto our warp signature. Full impulse, evasive maneuvers, Kirk ordered. The Enterprise banked sharply. Stars streaking across the view screen, but the lattice adjusted, instantly predicting their trajectory. Spock's eyes widened slightly. It is compensating before we complete maneuvers. It is anticipating. Strange's stomach dropped. It's rung in simulations. McCoy stared at him. Simulations of what? Of us. The lattice flared and a beam of pale light shot toward the Enterprise. Shields. Absorbed the impact but not cleanly. Instead of exploding, the beam wrapped around the ship like a net, shields holding at 60%. Scotty shouted. But the field's not dissipating, it's restructuring around us. On the view screen the spherical grid closed. Lines of energy intersected, forming a perfect geometric prison. Spock analyzed rapidly. Captain, the structure is not composed of matter or conventional energy. It is a mathematical construct imposed directly onto spacetime. Kirk stared at him. You're telling me we're trapped inside an equation? In essence, Spock replied. Strange exhaled slowly. It learned from the Time Stone. The eye flickered brighter in response. It can't erase me without destabilizing time. Strange continued. So it's isolating this region of space. Quarantining magic. McCoy's voice dropped. Like a virus. Strange met his gaze. Exactly. The lattice tightened. The stars outside dimmed as if viewed through frosted glass. Spock checked his readings again and for the first time. Uncertainty crept into his voice. Captain, warp travel is no longer accessible. The local space-time curvature has been flattened. Flattened, Kirk repeated. Our engines require subspace distortion to achieve warp. The lattice has neutralized it. Scotty's voice crackled in. Frustration. It's like trying to sail without water. Captain, the Enterprise was trapped, not by force, by physics rewritten around it. Strange closed his eyes, reaching inward. He felt nothing. No mystical currents, no dimensional seams. This universe was silent. But the eye was different. It didn't draw from ambient magic. It drew from time itself. Spock approached him again. Your artifact remains active, barely Strange replied. Then perhaps, Spock said carefully, it represents our only variable outside the imposed system. Kirk looked between them. Translation, Spock's eyes met Strange's. If the lattice is a self-correcting equation, then introducing non-linear temporal events may create instability. Strange gave a faint smile. You want me to break math? I want you, Spock said evenly, to challenge its predictive capacity. The lattice pulsed again. This time, the beam penetrated the shields, phasing through harmlessly. Crew members gasped as faint holographic overlays appeared across the bridge. Key equations, projections, projections, projections. Strange saw something the others didn't. A projection of himself. Dissected, analyzed, mapped. It's modeling my magic, he whispered. The projection shifted, showing possible countermeasures, temporal dampening fields, causal anchors, time nullification waves. It's evolving, Spock said quietly. Strange clenched his fists. If it finishes that model, he said, the time stone won't save us again. Kirk stepped forward decisively. Then we don't let it finish. The question hung unspoken. How do you fight a universe that's calculating your every move? Strange opened his eyes. There's one thing it can't predict. Spock tilted his head, and that is. Strange looked directly at him. Choice. The eye flared brighter than before. Time fractured again, but this time, Strange didn't multiply himself. He multiplied possibilities. Across the bridge, crew members saw flickers of alternate outcomes overlapping reality. In one, Kirk ordered self-destruct. In another, Spock initiated a warp core breach. In another, Strange removed the eye entirely. The lattice trembled, its projections scrambled. Spock's scanner spiked wildly. Captain, predictive model is the sphere flickered, lines misaligning. Strange poured everything into the stone. Carney whispered, you want logic? Try paradox. The lattice convulsed and then it stopped. Not collapsed, not retreated. Paused. The projections vanished. The beams withdrew. The spherical grid held position, but ceased active restructuring. Silence filled the bridge. Spock scanned cautiously. The containment matrix remains intact. However, it is no longer adapting. Kirk exhaled slowly. Why? Strange lowered his hands, breathing hard. Because it can't solve us, he said. Far beyond the lattice, deep in subspace, the cosmic intelligence recalculated. If prediction failed, another solution would be required, and this time, it would not target the sorcerer, it would target the source. On the bridge, the stars dimmed again, and somewhere, far across the galaxy, something else began to wake. What if the universe stopped trying to contain magic, and decided instead to weaponize it? The stars outside the lattice shifted, not visibly at first, not in a way that set off alarms, but Spock felt it in the readings, a subtle redistribution of subspace harmonics, a reallocation of cosmic resources. The containment sphere remained around the Enterprise, silent and geometrically perfect, but something beyond it was moving. Captain, Spock said carefully, long-range sensors are detecting energy fluctuations across multiple sectors. Kirk turned, defined multiple, approximately 17 light-years in radius. McCoy let out a low whistle. That's not local. Strange stepped toward the view screen, his expression tightening. It's not focusing on us anymore. No, Spock agreed. It appears to be tracing the origin of the anomaly. Strange's stomach dropped. It's looking for where I came from. The eye of Agamotto pulsed faint, uneasy. Spock's hands moved quickly across his console. Captain, I am detecting microfractures forming along distant subspace corridors. The view screen zoomed outward, displaying a star map. Tiny flashes of distortion blinked across the grid like infections spreading through tissue. It's recreating the rift. Strange whispered. Kirk's voice hardened. Can it reopen whatever brought you here? Yes, Strange said, but not to send me back. McCoy's eyes narrowed. Then why? Strange didn't answer immediately, because he felt it. The universe wasn't just adapting to magic, it was studying it, learning its pathways. If it understands the topology of the multiverse, Strange said slowly, it can access other dimensions. Spock's expression shifted just slightly. You are suggesting that this self-correcting system may extend beyond our universe. I'm suggesting, Strange replied, that it's about to. A tremor rippled through the lattice. Not inward, outward. Lines of light extended from the spherical cage like roots burrowing into space. Spock's voice remained combat urgent. Captain, the containment matrix is no longer solely defensive. It is transmitting energy through subspace at exponential velocity. To where? Kirk demanded. Spock's answer came a second later. Everywhere. The stars on the map began blinking rapidly, one by one. 17 light years became 30. Became 50. The wave was accelerating. McCoy turned to Strange. He said, "Your magic doesn't belong here. What happens if this universe gets a taste of it?" Voice dropped. "Then it stops being this universe." The eye flared suddenly brighter than before. A projection burst across the bridge, not from the lattice, from the stone. Images cascaded through the air. Other realities, sanctums, dark dimensions, astral planes, and then the Borg. The image shifted to a cube drifting through space. But it was wrong. The surface shimmered with arcane runes. Green energy coiled around it, not technological, but mystical. Spock's eyes widened slightly. Explain. Strange swallowed. If the lattice reaches across dimensional barriers, it won't just analyze magic, it will integrate it, Spock finished. The Borg cube in the projection pulsed and reality around it, warped like liquid. Kirk stared. "You're saying something like that could happen here?" Strange met his gaze. "I'm saying something worse, could." The projection shifted again. Q. The omnipotent being stood in a courtroom that flickered between universes. Even he looked uncertain. Strange's breath caught. "Even entities of higher dimensional awareness may be affected," Spock observed quietly. The projection ended abruptly. The eye dimmed. Silence filled the bridge. "Captain," Ura said softly. "Starfleet Command is reporting widespread sensor disruptions across the quadrant. They're seeing spatial anomalies identical to ours." Kirk's jaw tightened. "Opened a channel." Static filled the air. Then Admiral Cormac's face appeared, distorted slightly. "Enterprise," the Admiral said, tension clear in his voice. "We're detecting unprecedented subspace interference across Federation space. Warplanes are distorted. Stars were fluctuating." "Sir," Kirk replied, "we believe it's connected to a transuniversal event involving our guest." Cormac's eyes flicked to Strange. "Guest?" Strange stepped forward. "I didn't mean for this," he said quietly. "But your universe, he's trying to understand magic, and in doing so, it's rewriting itself." Cormac's expression hardened. "Can you stop it?" Strange hesitated. "I don't know." The transmission flickered, then cut out. The lattice pulsed again. This time, the entire sphere lit up with cascading equations. Spock's scanner screamed with data. "Captain, the system has completed a large-scale predictive model." "Of what?" Kirk demanded. Spock looked at Strange. "Of integration." The lattice's outward-reaching tendrils snapped back inward suddenly. The spherical cage contracted, not around the Enterprise, but around the eye of Agamotto. Strange gasped as invisible pressure crushed against his chest. "Is targeting the stone," he shouted. The eye spun violently, resisting. Spock's voice cut through the chaos. "Captain, the artifact represents the only persistent source of nonlinear causality within the Matrix. If integrated, it becomes part of the system." Kirk finished grimly. "And if the time stone became part of this universe's correction mechanism, magic would no longer be an anomaly, it would be a tool." The lattice tightened. Cracks of green light split across the surface of the eye. Strange fell to one knee, gripping it desperately. "You don't want this," he shouted, not to the crew, but to the cosmos itself. "You think you're stabilizing reality? You're about to give it power it was never meant to wield." The pressure increased. Spock's single-quotes eyes locked onto the readings. "If the stone is absorbed, the lattice's computational capacity will increase beyond calculable limits." "How beyond?" McCoy demanded. Spock's answer was quiet, omniscient. The word froze the air. Kirk moved instantly. "Mr. Spock, options." "Cliff's Ares 1, Spock said. All eyes turned to him. "If the artifact is removed from this space-time continuum before integration completes, the lattice will lose its reference point." Strange looked up sharply. "Removed how?" Spock met his gaze. "By returning you to your origin universe." Strange's heart pounded. "The rift's closed," he said. "Not entirely," Spock replied. "The system has mapped its coordinates. If we can access the lattice's transmission pathways, you can hijack it. Strange realized. Correct. McCoy stared at them. You want to use the universe's own immune system to send him back? Yes, Spock said simply. The lattice flared brighter. The eye cracked further. Time itself flickered across the bridge, moments overlapping, voices echoing out of sync. Kirk looked at Strange. If we do this, he said, you don't come back. Strange felt the weight of that. This universe so structured, already begun to fascinate him. But if he stayed, it would be rewritten. He exhaled slowly. Do it. Spock moved instantly, rerouting power through deflector arrays. Scotty's voice roared over comms. Yeah, push in. The core, past redline. Necessary, Spock replied calmly. The lattice trembled as the Enterprise projected a counter-signal onto its own transmission network. A tear began forming in the center of the sphere. Familiar amber, jagged strange, stood. The cloak billowing, the eye glowed weakly, but still alive. The portal widened on the other side. The sanctum. Kirk stepped. Classer, this is it. Strange nodded. But just as he turned toward the portal, the lattice shifted. Spock's eyes widened slightly. Captain, the system has predicted this outcome. The portal flickered violently, and from within it something reached back. What if the portal home wasn't an escape, but a doorway for something far worse? The amber rift trembled at the center of the containment sphere, its edges crackling with unstable chronometric fire. On the other side, the sanctum sanctorum flickered like a memory, struggling to hold shape. Frozen mid-flame, the cloaks stand empty. New York's skyline dim beyond the windows. For half a second, it looked like salvation. Then the hand emerged, not flesh, not machine, a construct of shifting geometry and pale light, formed from the same equations that bound the Enterprise in its spherical cage. It reached through the portal knots to pull Strange back. But to anchor itself, Spock's voice cut sharply. Across the bridge, the lattice is extending a stabilizing framework into the portal aperture. It is attempting to bridge both universes simultaneously. Kirk's jaw tightened. Translation. It is not sending him home, McCoy breathed. It's following him. Strange felt the eye pulse violently against his chest as the geometric hand tightened around the portal's rim. Reality on both sides shuddered. No, Strange whispered. It's not supposed to be able to do that. The voice returned inside his mind, colder now, more refined. You are origin vector. Integration incomplete. Expansion required. The lattice had evolved again. It no longer sought to erase magic. It sought to export it across the portal. The sanctum flickered and Strange saw something horrifying. The walls shimmered with faint, alien lines of light. The universe he came from was already being scanned. Kirk stepped forward. Close it. Spock's hands flew across his console. Negative. The aperture is now partially supported by the lattice's own energy. Terminating the signal would collapse the containment field catastrophically, and us with it. McCoy snapped. Probability. High. The geometric hand pushed further through the portal. Symbols spread across the sanctum floor like frost. Strange, understreamed with chilling clarity. If the lattice crossed fully into his universe, it would not just study magic. It would restructure it. The multiverse itself could become a single, self-correcting equation. No chaos. No possibility, no choice. The eye flared brighter in response, reacting not with panic but defiance. Time rippled outward from Strange in unstable waves. He stepped toward the portal. Dr. Cook barked. That thing is connected to the entire lattice. I know, Strange replied. That's why I have to touch it. McCoy stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You've got a better plan? Strange didn't answer. He reached out and grabbed the geometric construct. Pain exploded through him, not physical but conceptual. His thoughts fragmented into probabilities. Futures flashed in violent bursts. In one, the Federation became a magical empire, spanning galaxies. In another, Earth in his universe was sterilized by cold logic rewriting its physical laws. In another, both universes merged into something unrecognizable. The voice intensified. Stability requires convergence. Strange clenched his teeth. Stability requires freedom. He forced the eye open. Green light burst outward, flooding the portal. Time fractured not linearly, but radially. Instead of moving forward or backward, it spiraled. Spock's scanner screamed with data overload. Captain, the artifact is creating a localized temporal inversion field. What does that mean? Kirk demanded. Cliff demanded it means, Spock replied, eyes fixed on the readings. The causality chain connecting the lattice to the portal is being reversed. The geometric hand flickered violently. Strange pushed harder. If you want integration, he growled, try integrating this. He didn't multiply possibilities this time. He multiplied origins. Across the portal, the sanctum split into countless variations, each representing a slightly different multiversal entry point. The lattice faltered. Its anchor lost certainty. Error. The voice echoed faintly. The containment sphere trembled around the Enterprise. Spock's voice sharpened. The predictive model cannot reconcile multiple simultaneous origin vectors. Kirk saw his opening. Scotty. Maximum output to the deflector. Now Captain. The Enterprise unleashed a focused burst of energy directly into the portal's edge, not to destroy it, but to destabilize the lattice's connection. The geometric hand shattered into fragments of light. The portal flickered violently. Strange staggered, but held his ground. With a final surge, he twisted his hand and time snapped. The portal collapsed inward like a dying star. The lattice recoiled violently, its tendrils ripping free from subspace corridors across the quadrant. The spherical cage around the Enterprise lines misaligning, equations dissolving into chaotic bursts of light. Spock steadied himself against the console. The containment matrix is fragmenting. The stars outside returned to clarity. The sphere imploded, silently collapsing into nothing. Silence fell across the bridge. No frost, no distortion, just open space. Strange dropped to one knee, breathing heavily. The eye dimmed but did not crack further. McCoy rushed forward, scanning him. You're still in one piece. That's a start. Spock checked long-range sensors. Subspace harmonics are returning to baseline. The transmission network has ceased expansion. Kirk exhaled slowly. Is it over? Strange looked at the stars. For a moment, they were still. Then faint pulse rippled through them. Not aggressive, not corrective, observational. The voice returned one final time. Quieter. Now. Assessment ongoing. Strange closed his eyes. It's not done, he said softly. Spock nodded. The system has shifted from active integration to passive study. Kirk crossed his arms. Meaning, it is learning without interference. Spock replied. McCoy frowned. That sounds worse. Strange stood slowly. It is, he agreed. Because now the universe understood. Something it hadn't before. Magic was not a contradiction. It was a variable, and variables could be optimized. The bridge lights flickered, briefly, not from damage, but recalibration. Spock's eyes narrowed at his console. Captain, he said quietly, a new anomaly has appeared. Kirk looked up sharply. Where? Spock turned the view screen toward a distant star system. A single star was pulsing irregularly, not collapsing, not exploding, restructuring, as if reality around it was being rewritten, carefully, deliberately. Strange felt a chill run down his spine. It found a safer test site, he whispered. Kirk's voice hardened. Test for what? The star flared down for a split second. Arcane symbols shimmered across its surface. Spock's expression went utterly still. Captain, he said, the star is emitting chronometric radiation. Strange's heart sank. It's building its own time stone. What if a star became the first spell ever cast by science, and no one could stop it from finishing the incantation? The pulsing star dominated the view screen now, magnified to impossible clarity. Its surface churned in violent solar storms, but threaded between the flares were faint, geometric lines, not random plasma arcs. Patterns, structured, intentional. Spock's voice was steady, but quieter than usual. The star's core fusion rate is fluctuating in accordance with a nonlinear sequence. It is not discretizing, it's synchronizing. Strange, said Doc. Kirk turned sharply. Synchronizing with what? Strange stepped closer to the screen, eyes narrowing as the eye of Agamotto flickered weakly against his chest. With time, the star pulsed again, this time slower, deliberate, like a heartbeat. Learning rhythm. McCoy stared at the readings scrolling across Spock's console. You're telling me that thing is experimenting with temporal mechanics? Yes, Spock replied. It appears the universal correction system has isolated chronometric manipulation as a viable component for long-term stability. Kirk's jaw tightened. In plain terms, Strange didn't look away from the star. It's building a natural time stone. Silence fell. A star cannot build anything, McCoy muttered. Spock folded his hands behind his back. Under ordinary conditions, that statement would be accurate. The star flared brighter. Across its surface, the geometric lines began forming a spherical lattice mirroring the one that had caged the Enterprise. But this time, it wasn't surrounding something, it was forming inside the star's core. Captain Uhura said quietly, "Starfleet Command is reporting gravitational anomalies across the sector. Nearby planets are experiencing localized time dilation." Kirk's eyes narrowed. How localized? Minutes are passing in seconds. In some regions. McCoy looked at Strange. "If that star finishes whatever it's doing, it won't just affect this system," Strange said. "It will create a fixed temporal anchor." Spock nodded slightly. "A self-sustaining chronometric reference point embedded in stellar mass." Kirk understood. "A control node." "Yes, Captain." Strange felt a cold realization settle in. The universe wasn't trying to integrate his time stone anymore. It was replicating the principle, using its own materials. Science had watched magic, and now it was adapting it. The star pulsed, agonant. For a fraction of a second, everyone on the bridge felt it. A skip, a hitch in reality. McCoy blinked. "Did anyone else just feel like we lost a second?" Spock checked his console instantly. "We did not lose it, Doctor." "Then what happened?" Voice was almost reverent. "We experienced it twice." Kirk turned sharply. Exclaimed. "The star emitted a chronometric echo," Spock said. "A localized temporal loop approximately 0.8 seconds in duration." Strange's breath caught. "It's practicing." The eye of Agamotto pulsed hard, responding instinctively to the artificial temporal signature. The star flared violently in response. Spock's eyes widened slightly. "The star is reacting to the artifact. It senses it," Strange said. "Two-time anchors can't coexist without interference." McCoy frowned. "Like magnets. Like rival heartbeats." Strange corrected. "One will overpower the other." Kirk made his decision instantly. "Set course for that star." Spock hesitated only a fraction. "Captain, approaching the anomaly may expose us to severe temporal distortions." "If that thing finishes," Kirk replied, "there won't be a Federation left to worry about distortions." "Aye, sir," Spock said. The Enterprise surged forward at maximum warp. As they approached, space itself began to ripple. Stars elongated unnaturally. The view screen flickered between moment shot and the star slightly ahead in its pulse cycle. Then, slightly behind, warp field destabilizing. Scotty shouted, "Time's not flowing evenly out here." Strange gripped the rail as the deck shimmered beneath his feet. He felt it clearly now. His star wasn't just experimenting. It was accelerating. The lattice inside its core tightened, forming a perfect, glowing sphere of compressed chronometric energy. Spock's voice cut through the chaos. "Capto, the star has reached a critical synchronization threshold." "What happens at threshold?" Kirk demanded. Strange answered, "It ignites." As if in response, the star's light shifted from golden to emerald. Green, the same hue as the eye. The bridge fell silent. Spock's readings spiked off every known scale. "The star has achieved stable temporal recursion." McCoy stared, meaning, "It can now loop its own core processes indefinitely," Spock said. "It has become temporally set." "That's impossible," he whispered. "No," Spock said softly. "It is elegant." The star pulsed stand. A wave of chronometric energy radiated outward. The Enterprise shook violently. Crew members gasped as time flickered around them. For one terrifying moment, Strange saw the bridge, empty, abandoned. Then it snapped back. "What was that?" Kirk barked. Spock's voice was tight now. "A projection of a potential timeline in which we fail to intervene." Strange's breath came faster. The star wasn't just practicing anymore. It was predicting. The wave expanded across the system. Planets froze mid-rotation, then corrected. Moons flickered between orbital positions. The star was anchoring itself as the sector's temporal authority. The eye of Agamotto flared painfully against Strange's chest. He staggered. "It's challenging me," he realized. "Clarify," Spock said. "It wants dominance," Strange replied. "Two timekeepers can't share jurisdiction." The star pulsed against Onge. The eye cracked slightly at its edge. McCoy saw it. "That thing's not built to compete with a star." "No," Strange whispered. "It's built to protect balance." Kirk stepped forward. "Then protect it." Strange closed his eyes. He reached inward not for raw power, but for precision. The eye opened slowly. Green light streamed outward not in a beam, but in delicate threads. Instead of attacking the star, Strange wove the threads into its pulse cycle. Spock's eyes widened. Captain, he is synchronizing with it. What? McCoy breathed. He is not opposing the temporal anchor, Spock continued. He is harmonizing. Strange's voice echoed faintly as he focused. You don't need to dominate, he murmured to the star, to the universe. You need to understand. The star's pulse wavered. Its emerald glow flickered. Strange poured intent not force into the connection. Magic was not about control. It was about possibility. The star's lattice shifted. Its recursion slowed. Spock watched in stunned silence. The temporal feedback loop is destabilizing. Kirk stared at the screen. Is it shutting down? No, Spock said quietly. It is releasing autonomy. The emerald light faded gradually back to gold. The chronometric wave dissipated. Time smoothed. The eye dimmed, its crack no longer spreading. Strange fell to his knees, exhausted. The star burned normally once more. Silence returned. McCoy exhaled shakily. Tell me that's over. Strange looked at the star and felt something new. Not hostility. Recognition. It learned something, he said softly. Spock studied his readings one last time. The universal correction system has ceased active replication of temporal mechanics. Kirk crossed his arms. Why? Strange met Spock's eyes. Because it realized something. Spock tilted his head slightly. And that is, Strange's expression grew grave. Magic isn't a flaw in the system. He looked back at the stars. It's a choice the system can't calculate. Far beyond Federation space, deep within subspace itself, the correction mechanism recalibrated once more, not to eliminate, not to integrate, but to escalate. Because if it could not replicate magic, it would test the one who wielded it. And this time, the test would not be cosmic. It would be personal. On the view screen, space twisted faintly, and a familiar, mocking voice echoed through the bridge. Well now, this is interesting. What if the universe decided it couldn't solve magic, so it invited someone who thrives on the impossible to do it instead? The mocking voice echoed across the bridge, not from speakers, not from subspace, but from everywhere at once. Well no. This is interesting. The air shimmered, and suddenly, there he was, seated casually in Captain Kirk's chair, leg crossed over knee, perfectly composed. Q. Kirk's jaw tightened instantly. I was wondering when you'd show up. Q examined his fingernails as though mildly bored. Honestly, James, I was going to let you handle it. You do love punching above your weight. But then this happened. He gestured lazily towards Strange. And now, the universe is behaving like a cat that's discovered quantum mechanics. Spock's expression remained controlled. You are aware of the ongoing temporal instability. My dear Vulcan, Q smiled thinly. I am the instability. Strange rose slowly to his feet, exhaustion still clinging to him. The eye of Agamotto pulsed faintly, reacting to Q's presence in a way that felt familiar. You're not part of the correction system, Strange said quietly. Q's eyes flicked toward him, amused. Oh good, the wizard speaks. You're separate, Strange continued, higher dimensional, observing. Q stood, strolling across the bridge as though it were a stage. Your arrival caused quite the stir. A universe built on tidy equations suddenly discovers improvisation. He snapped his fingers. Delicious. Kirk stepped forward. If you're here to gloat, don't. Q tilted his head. Oh, I'm not gloating. I'm evaluating. Spock's brow furrowed slightly. Evaluating what? Q stopped in front of Strange. The bridge fell silent. Strange held Q's gaze. The universe tried to erase me, then replicate me. Now it's studying me. Yes, Q said lightly. Because it cannot categorize you. And that bothers it. His smile faded slightly. And when something this vast is bothered, things escalate. McCoy crossed his arms. So what? You're here to referee? Q chuckled. Doctor, I don't referee, I curate. Strange felt the eye warm again. You're not neutral, he said. You're curious. Q's eyes gleamed. Finally, someone paying attention. The view screen flickered suddenly. Stars warped not violently, but deliberately. Spock's console lit up with cascading alerts. Captain Subspace is forming a localized construct directly around the Enterprise. Kirk didn't look away from Q. Is that you? Q feigned offense. Please, if I were responsible, it would be far more dramatic. Space outside twisted into a smooth, seamless white void. No stars, no planets, just blank infinity. The Enterprise was no longer in Federation space, or anywhere measurable. Spock's voice was combat tense. We are no longer within charted space-time. Strange felt it instantly. This wasn't the correction system. This was something else. The void rippled and a figure emerged. Not geometric, not mechanical, humanoid, formed from shifting constellations. Its voice resonated not in the air but in thought. External variable persists. Q folded his hands behind his back. Ah, there it is. Kirk's hand tightened at his side. What is that? Spock answered quietly. The correction mechanism, as manifested in interface. The constellating being turned its luminous gaze towards Strange. Adaptive modeling insufficient. Direct evaluation required. Strange exhaled slowly. So, this is the test. Q smirked. And here I thought you liked exams. The being extended its hand. Reality shifted. Suddenly, Strange stood alone in the void. The Enterprise vanished. Q vanished. Only the constellation entity remained. You destabilize universal continuity, it said. Strange straightened. Continuity isn't everything. Continuity ensures survival. Survival without choice isn't life. The void flickered and Strange was no longer floating. He stood in New York, but it was wrong. The sanctum was gone. In its place stood a sterile research tower bearing the insignia of Starfleet. Hovercraft filled the skies. Technology hummed where mystic wards once stood. This is a projection, Strange said calmly. A stable integration outcome, the entity replied. Magic assimilated. Probability of chaos reduced by 78%. Strange walked forward slowly. He saw Wong wearing a Starfleet uniform. He saw sorcerers operating as temporal engineers. No chaos. No demons. No incursions. Peace, you see, the entity asked. Efficiency. Strange felt the temptation. No more threats from Dormammu. No more multiversal collapses. Everything predictable. Everything safe. Then he noticed something. The eye of Agamotto displayed behind glass. Inactive. Sealed. Choice removed. He turned back to the entity. And what happens when something new appears? He asked. Something you can't model? The projection flickered. Another scene replaced it. The Federation expanded across galaxies. Magic woven into warp drives. Time controlled precisely. No wars. No Q. Q's voice echoed faintly from nowhere. Well, that's rude. The entity spoke again. Convergence maximizes stability. Strange closed his eyes briefly. You don't understand magic, he said softly. Clarify. Magic isn't about power. It's about possibility. The unpredictable moment that changes everything. The void shifted again. Now Strange saw another projection. The Borg enhanced with chronometric awareness. A cube phasing through time itself. Unstoppable. Unregulated possibility introduces existential threats, the entity said. Strange's jaw tightened. You're afraid? The entity paused. Clarify. You're afraid of not knowing what comes next? Silence. For the first time, the constellation flickered. Q reappeared beside Strange, applauding slowly. Oh, I do enjoy when mortals poke cosmic insecurities. The entity's gaze shifted to Q. You are non-compliant variable. Story of my life, Q replied. The void trembled. The entity expanded its form, stretching across the white's infinity. Final evaluation required. Suddenly Strange felt it. The entity wasn't going to erase him. It was going to measure him. Not his power, his limits. The void shattered into fragments of possible futures. Billions of them. Each one branching from a single decision. Each one dependent on Strange to choose. The entity commanded. Strange looked around at infinite realities spinning around him. Q leaned in, whispering lightly, Careful, it's not asking which universe survives. Strange narrowed his eyes. Then what is it asking? Q's smile faded. It's asking whether magic deserves to. The infinite futures began collapsing inward. The entity's voice echoed like a final verdict approaching. Demonstrate necessity. Strange inhaled slowly. This wasn't a battle. It was a proof. And if he failed, magic wouldn't be destroyed. It would be deemed irrelevant. Across the void, the Enterprise flickered in and out of existence. Kirk, Spock, McCoy paused, between seconds. Strange stepped forward. "All right," he said quietly. "You want proof?" The futures converged violently toward a single outcome, and for the first time since arriving in this universe, the eye of Agamotto opened completely. What if the fate of magic didn't depend on power, but on proving that the universe itself needs uncertainty to survive? The eye of Agamotto opened fully, and this time, it did not glow with aggressive green light. It shone softly, steadily, not like a weapon, like a heartbeat. The infinite futures spiraling around Strange slowed not because he forced them to, but because he anchored himself within them. The constellation entity loomed across the white void, vast and radiant. Demonstrate necessity, it repeated. Q hovered nearby, unusually quiet now, watching with sharp interest. Strange did not raise his hands to attack. He did not multiply timelines. He did not fracture causality. Instead, he did something far simpler. He chose one future, not the most stable, not the most efficient, not the safest. He chose the one where he never arrived in this universe at all. The void shifted. The Enterprise reappeared in normal space. No lattice, no star experiment, no chronometric fractures. Starfleet continued, untouched by magic. The correction system remained dormant. Perfect. The entity's voice resonated, baseline restored, variable removed, stability maximized. Q tilted his head slightly. Predictable. Strange stood within the projection, watching it unfold. He saw Kirk laughing on the bridge, Spock calculating calmly, McCoy complaining about Vulcans, the Federation thriving, peaceful, stable. Then the scene shifted forward. Years passed in seconds, then decades, then centuries. The Federation encountered a threat, not magical, not temporal, something entirely new, a phenomenon beyond their models, a civilization that weaponized uncertainty, itself operating outside predictable causality. The Federation responded with logic, with equations, with flawless projections, and they failed, because their universe had optimized away the unpredictable. They had no practice adapting to true chaos. The projection darkened. The Federation collapsed not from invasion, but from rigidity. The entity flickered slightly. Model inconsistency detected. Strange turned to it. "You optimized for stability," he said quietly, "but evolution requires variation." The projection shifted again. Now he chose a different future. One where magic integrated partially carefully into Federation science. Warp engines enhanced with chronometric flexibility. Medical breakthroughs, using dimensional energy. Exploration expanding beyond three-dimensional constraints. But this time, magic wasn't controlled. It wasn't caged. It was studied and respected. The Federation faced new threats. Some they lost. Some they won. But they adapted. Each unpredictable variable forced growth. The projection stabilized. The entity's light dimmed slightly as it processed. Instability introduces risk. Yes, Strange said, but it also introduces possibility. Q smiled faintly. He's good. The infinite futures began spinning faster again. The entity intensified. Uncertainty increases entropy. Entropy, Strange replied calmly, is how stars are born. The white void trembled. The constellation form began to fragment not in anger, but in recalculation. For the first time, it was not testing Strange's power. It was testing its own premise. Strange stepped forward. "You tried to erase me," he said, "then replicate me. Then measure me." The eye glowed brighter, not blinding, but warm. But magic isn't something you solve. It's something you experience. He reached out not to attack, but to offer. A single thread of green light extended from the eye toward the entity. Not invasive. Invitational. The entity hesitated. Define experience. Strange smiled faintly, not knowing what happens next, and choosing to step forward anyway. The thread touched the constellation form. And for a fraction of a second, the entity experienced uncertainty. Not chaos, not destruction, curiosity. Across the void, the infinite futures stopped collapsing. They expanded, not into disorder, but into branching potential. The white infinity dissolved. Stars returned. The Enterprise reappeared in normal space. Kirk stumbled slightly as gravity reasserted itself. Spock checked his console instantly. "Captain, we have returned to our original coordinates." McCoy blinked. "Is it over?" Strange stood at the center of the bridge once more. The constellation entity hovered briefly before the view screens, smaller now, contained. Assessment complete, it said. Spock's eyes remained fixed on it. Outcome. The entity's light shimmered gently. Variable classified as adaptive catalyst. Integration unnecessary. Elimination counterproductive. Kirk folded his arms, meaning. Strange exhaled slowly. It means magic stays. The entity continued. Observation protocol initiated. Non-intervention unless existential threshold exceeded. Q reappeared beside Kirk, clapping once. There we are. A compromise. How delightfully civil. The constellation form dissolved into starlight, dispersing across the cosmos. The stars settled. Subspace normalized. No lattice. No temporal star. Just space. Spock studied his readings for several long seconds. All chronometric anomalies have ceased. The universal correction system has resumed passive equilibrium. McCoy looked at Strange. So you passed the test? Strange shook his head slightly. No, he said softly. We all did. Kirk approached him. You could have gone home. Strange glanced at the eye of Agamotto. The crack along its surface had sealed. I still can, he replied. Spock tilted his head. You are choosing not to. For now, Strange said. Kirk smiled faintly. Careful. Starfleet might offer you a commission. Strange allowed himself a rare laugh. The cloak of levitation fluttered gently behind him. Q lingered a moment longer, studying Strange. You realize, Q said quietly, this universe won't forget you. Strange met his gaze. Good. Q's expression turned thoughtful. You didn't defeat it, he said. You changed it. Strange looked out at the stars. That's what magic is, he replied. Q vanished without another word. Silence settled over the bridge. The Enterprise drifted peacefully among the stars once more. But something subtle had shifted.